You mentioned India, and I want to spend the rest of our time talking about what's going on there. And the country seemed to actually be weathering this pretty well for much of the past year. And now we're seeing cases and deaths skyrocket. What's gone wrong recently there? Can you help us understand that a little bit better?
Well, you're right. 8 weeks ago, we were not where we are right now. So, one, that should tell every one of your viewers right now that things can change on a dime here with something as dangerous and as changeable as COVID-19. So, that's number one. Things can change quickly. Number two, this shows the importance of leadership. In some ways, we're seeing the playbook of early 2020 played out now in India with Prime Minister Modi and some of his leading health officials, where they're not acknowledging truth. Some of their messaging is completely way off. The Serum Institute of India leader fled the country when he should be there actually in country trying to lead the institute out of what was a chaotic planning process. They didn't plan for enough vaccines to remain within the country, and now they're trying to play catch up. So there's been a failure of leadership, failure of messaging. Fortunately, that's petered out in terms of behaviors, large gatherings, indoors in some cases for weddings, unmasked, and that's why you're seeing what you're seeing. On top of the fact that they just have a dangerous variant, so it's just bad luck as well. That's the unpredictability of this virus. So coupled with lack of foresight, lack of poor leadership, poor messaging, and just pandemic fatigue, in a place like India that's poor, that has densely urban types of its population is concentrated into dense urban areas. It's not surprising to see this. I think a lot of us were surprised that it was spared the worst of it early in 20. I do think trying to, in addition to hoping that we can mitigate loss of life in the short term, and I'm heartened to see what the Biden administration has done. Paige, I'll say that I think they could do more. We have military. I'm a ICU doc in the U.S. Air Force Reserves. We have the ability to actually do more in terms of deploying resources that could save lives now. It's not part of our conceptual framework, but we should do it. I'm happy to talk more about that. The pharmaceutical companies are stepping up, sending monoclonals, you name it, tocilizumab. These are medications that can save lives now in intensive care units, obviously oxygen. But then this is a call to action on the part of the Indian government. Sinopharm, their vaccine produced by manufacturers in China was just given emergency use by the WHO. The Indian government has not even considered it for approval within country, primarily because of politics, as I understand it. That's wrong. They are putting all their bets on Sputnik, potentially on getting some J&J, and on Covaxin and Covishield. They should really try to go for any option possible. They should put politics aside, Paige.
Well, and so you mentioned this, but can you elaborate a little more? And I know we're almost out of time, but I'd like to hear some more thoughts on what you think the Biden administration should be doing towards that situation.
Well, they waived IP, and hopefully the WTO ultimately follows suit. So that's a great medium-term solution, intellectual property, and allowing the generic production of vaccines and therapeutics. I do think the Biden administration could deploy military resources. The U.S. Air Force has something called the Critical Care Air Transport Team. There's 50 teams ready to deploy. That's 50 different ICU teams that could set up mobile triaging, mobile ICU care in hotspots across India. C5, C-17s, I've flown on several of them. We could be sending liquid oxygen around the clock to India because right now we're seeing civil society trying to do what whole governments need to be doing, militaries need to be doing, which is mobilization of resources at a scale that no one individual can possibly do. So that's just moving more oxygen. That's something the U.S. military could do better. And then ultimately donating more vaccines, lifting the export ban on vaccine allocation globally. That will actually be helpful in the short term. The IP waiver, that's helpful in the medium term. In the short term, let's get vaccines that are actually produced in the hands of Indians, in the hands of Brazilians. Paige, this is not just an Indian crisis right now. There's other parts of the world, like Brazil and elsewhere, that are really hurting as well. So waiving the export ban on the distribution of vaccines would be helpful as well.